Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday. It is Halloween, and we could not be more proud of the special guest that we have today, Jared Isaacman, which we're going to introduce. But Kelvin, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Kelvin G. I'm the Vice President of Tesla Owners of Silicon Valley, also the Executive Director of X Takeover.
And obviously, you may know me, John Stringer, President and Founder of Tesla Owners of Silicon Valley. Well, this podcast today, we are so blessed because of all the amazing work that Jared has been up to. A little bit about him and a little bit more we'll be getting into. He is the CEO of Shift4, the leader in integrated payment processing solutions. He's also a very accomplished pilot and astronaut with over 7,000 flight hours of aviation experience, including ratings in multiple experimental and ex-military aircraft. He was the commander of Inspiration 4, which was the world's first all-civilian mission to space that helped raise over $240 million for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital to help eradicate childhood cancer. And we're going to be getting into his latest mission, which is Polaris Dawn. Jared, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for
having me. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming today and for your time. But we'll just jump into it. Could you just tell us a little bit about the Polaris program and its mission initiatives?
Sure. Polaris program is it's designed to be a test and developmental program that bridges the gap from an incredibly capable spaceship like Dragon today that takes 4 lucky people into space. To the world that's in the not too distant future, where you have armadas of starships with, potentially 100 people in it, not only going into low Earth orbit, but returning to the moon, going to Mars and beyond. So there's an awful lot you need to kind of figure out in between. Like you might need, tens of thousands of spacesuits for people to get outside and to construct things or repair things or discover things on the moon or Mars. You're going to need to go past low Earth orbit into high radiation, high MMOD environments. You're going to need new forms of communication. So and all 3 of those things I just said were obviously components of our mission on Polaris Dawn. But these are the things we need to, kind of get outside our comfort zone in and get familiar with if we are going to have a future where, potentially, again, tens of thousands of people are out exploring among the stars. So that's the aim of the Polaris program. We just flew our first mission, Polaris Dawn, and what is likely to be our last mission will be the first crewed flight of Starship, kind of kicking off that new age of space exploration.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about, obviously this Polaris Dawn mission really pushed things to the limits. You guys reached some crazy heights that I don't think have been accomplished since Apollo 11, the Apollo days. But tell us, how did it feel to complete the first ever civilian spacewalk?
Well, I think that we all feel really lucky to be able to contribute towards a much, much bigger and grander endeavor, and I think coming back from the mission and being able to reflect back on it and saying like we were able to accomplish everything we set out to do is a great feeling, especially with this crew. Like it would have been super disappointing if we didn't get it all done. And we literally left nothing on the table. We used every minute up there. So yeah, the EVA and the spacewalk was very cool. It not just for like the 4 of us who were all, exposed to the vacuum of space and got to be in that lucky position to test out a new suit that, SpaceX took on an incredibly, challenging endeavor to do. No one's built a new spacesuit in 40 years, but we felt like we had all 14,000 SpaceXers with us. Like they invested in this. This wasn't, like the space race, where, it was 4.5% of US GDP that was going into NASA and amazing things were accomplished. It's privately funded, commercially funded endeavors that say we need to get outside our comfort zone and go very high and learn about that very threatening, hostile environment. We need to build new spacesuits and test them out and then figure out how we can make them even better so people can walk on the moon and Mars with them. We need new forms of communication because, there's only so much availability on legacy ground stations and teacher satellites. Like this is all things that SpaceX has endeavored to do that is privately and commercially funded, and not just for the lucky few in the future, but for everyone. So we felt like a lot of pressure, no pun intended, to make sure we got it right out there. And it was really an incredible experience, big sensory event, being out there.
You talked about the sensory experiences, Jared. So, astronauts who've done spacewalks and look back at the planet Earth say it's life-changing, or it's very emotional, or, it changes the perspective. Can you elaborate on what the sensory experience was for you in terms of looking back at our little planet?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, and also like how it's changed between my first and second mission. So, the first mission to me was just inspiration for it. Was so motivating. Seeing Earth is certainly fantastic. I mean, it definitely kind of radiates an energy, and the light is more intense than any video can capture. So you certainly appreciate how small we are, kind of in the grand scheme of things, that we are literally this microscopic piece of dust in in the universe, and we know so little about it. You don't really need to see Earth from that perspective to know we shouldn't destroy our environment or not wage wars over lines drawn in a map after World War I. Like those things, I think, even though they're recycled talking points, I think are pretty, apparent to most people, and that you don't need to go to space to know that. But I think, to me, like getting the perspective of how small we are, seeing the moon out in the distance, and knowing we haven't been back there in 50 years was very motivating. Like, we need to get out there and do this. And fortunately, thanks to the recent Starship, super heavy catch, we're closer to it than ever before, of having the technical means to go out and explore our solar system. What I realized in the second mission, and specifically from the EVA, because looking out the window is always an incredible visual experience. Whether you're looking at Earth or looking into the star field or seeing the moon or the aurora, it's very pleasant. It's awesome. Doing it from a spacesuit, where there's nothing, between you and, the deathness like that surrounds you, but a visor, is a different set of, feelings altogether. And that's because there are a lot of senses firing here. I mean, you've got pressure changes, temperature changes, there's adrenaline, there's physicality to pushing against a pressurized spacesuit. But man, I'll tell you, when I looked out into the darkness of space with just that visor in front of me, it was not like a welcoming or hospitable or pleasant. I mean, you had a real appreciation for how hard it all is. Like, everything around you here is trying to kill you. There is no atmosphere, to breathe. The radiation is very intense out there when you get outside low Earth orbit. I mean, look, seeing that beautiful aurora down as far as like Florida was spectacular when you're on Earth. It is not going to be great when you're up in space, and especially outside of low Earth orbit, and those things are happening. There's debris, some of it, man-made, others just naturally occurring out there that, I mean, they're traveling many times the speed of a bullet and will shred a spacesuit or a spaceship. So it's just like an appreciation that it's, yes, we need to go out there and do all this. This is our destiny. This is the trajectory for humankind, but it's hard. It's very threatening, and we got to get it right.
And this is just a follow-up question to that. How are you guys even knowing what's coming around, right? Because you're saying all these objects are just moving at these insane rates. Like, is it just something that you have you guys have like stuff around you just to see what's going on at all times and what's coming? Obviously, I mean, that's part of, I think, some of the stuff that Elon's even talked about, in stopping random meteoroids or things like that coming to Earth and stuff. But how do you even know what is potentially coming your way, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, we can screen our trajectories for known objects and call it like a 1/4 inch or greater in size. The Space Force has definitely have really good capabilities out there to see certain size objects, and that gets shared with NASA. It gets shared with even China and our even our potential adversaries or rivals in space, and we can screen our trajectory for those size objects. The issue is, even like a piece of aluminum that's 1 millimeter in size would like go through a spaceship. That's the thing. Like, you're traveling at orbital velocities where we're going 8 kilometers a second. That object's going 8 kilometers a second. that's a problem. So this is why we launched at, at such extreme, hours. Our launch window was basically 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. We took our second window at, 5 something in the morning, was because we were positioning the spaceship. Like, we are always trying to orient the spaceship for the best, power generation. So solar activity and communications. And there are parts of the spaceship that if they're going to get hit, we'd rather they get hit, which is the trunk that we throw away at the end of the mission. So by picking our launch window correctly, the areas of highest debris concern that you can't track, we were going to be able to put the trunk in that into the velocity vector to kind of soak up those hits. During the EVA, we put the nose cone in an optimal position. So basically, you're playing the odds. And you're just trying to use your launch timing, your position in orbit, the position of the trunk, and the nose cone to try and give you as much protection as you can. But even still, like, you're going to hit some things. They're going to be small hits, and you're hoping that they just don't do damage to critical systems of the spaceship.
Yeah, that's incredible. Kelvin, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like some crazy preparation that had to take place. Can you talk about the things you had to think about and prepare? Like, I don't think people knew about what you just described about, the window and positioning the craft in a way to minimize the damage. Can you talk about the amount of preparation that you guys had to go through for this first commercial spacewalk?
Yeah, I mean, it's why it took us 2.5 years, from announcement to launch. And believe me, all of the heavy lifting was done by, the smartest people and most highly motivated I've ever encountered, which are the people who show up for work at SpaceX every day. That's where your rocket scientists are. So, I mean, developing a spacesuit with lots of redundancy, 2 different oxygen pathways, thermal regulation, tons of awesome mobility. We went through, like, basically this Frankenstein evolution of new arms, new gloves, new visors that we were testing the whole time. And then, all of the GNC and trajectory screening folks were the ones who figured out the optimal times to launch and what position, we should have the spacecraft in to provide maximum protection. And then you just train all the emergencies. So every spaceflight mission, failure to depressurization, as in you hit an object and it put a hole in the spaceship. So that's a standard training profile. But then you layer onto it, what if you can't repressurize during an EVA? We protected, several hours of additional oxygen to be able to make it back to Earth. If we couldn't repressurize the vehicle. And these are things NASA trained for, going when they didn't have airlocks back in, Gemini and even the Apollo program. So you train for that. You train for all the emergencies, and you're just, you're never seeing something for the first time, ideally, when you're in space. Like, it would have happened many times over in a simulator.
Yeah, no, I mean, just thinking about the odds and, like, when you think of, like, betting, it's just, the preparation while you're in space, and then obviously preparing for all the emergencies. That's it seems also kind of like reverse logic, right? You're literally preparing for every worst case scenario. What would you say are, like, the key differences between, the Polaris Dawn spacewalk maybe, and then versus, the other spacewalks that have happened historically?
Yeah, it's such an awesome question, right? Like, there's a lot of things about our mission that people would, say is like, okay, but didn't we do this in the 60s? Didn't we go really far from Earth? Didn't we do spacewalks? And, it's like, yeah, we absolutely did. And guess what? We all helped fund it. Again, NASA's budget was through the roof. It was 4.5% of US GDP, and we achieved really amazing things. But we achieved those things for the benefit of the few. A handful of incredibly lucky test pilots and scientists, benefited from all of that investment, going out deep into space, testing new spacework, spacesuits during the Gemini days. Well, SpaceX vision isn't to make, life multiplanetary for, a half dozen lucky folks. They're trying to do it for everyone, like really open up this last frontier, for the good of all of humankind, which means governments aren't going to be the only ones that know how to do spacewalks. Governments aren't going to be the only ones with spacesuits and laser link communication and know how to, navigate a spaceship through very hostile environments of radiation and debris. Like that has to be learned by commercial industry, and who better, than SpaceX, who's leading it right now. So, our spacewalk, by comparison to the 300 or so that have been done, since since Leonov did it, in the 1960s, was more akin to the 1960s. It was about learning. SpaceX, is going to take all that data back and make a better suit. That's like in kind of their, SpaceX iterative design philosophy. They're going to build the backpack. They're going to increase mobility, run at higher pressures until you've got a suit that you can make it mass produce and use on the moon or Mars someday. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely more akin to the 1960s type of spacewalks of like, get out there and figure it out. But it was done, largely privately and commercially funded, unlike that time period, which is what's so awesome.
Jared, you talked about the spacesuits and how they haven't really changed in decades. So can you talk a little bit more about how they performed, and were there any challenges or surprises you guys faced?
Yeah, so I think everything went pretty much as expected, and definitely lots of credit to NASA too. SpaceX did not start from zero here. Obviously, they had a successful IVA suit that was tested previously, but NASA was there at times over the last 2.5 years. They sent out their astronauts, their subject matter experts on suit development and EVA operations, and gave us a lot of good feedback, not just for our EVA. In fact, like the least of it mattered for our EVA. It was about the future of lots and lots of people doing spacewalks that NASA was trying to help SpaceX with. So, I mean, they had some great predictions, for example, like we wouldn't, probably the hatch motor that was designed for our mission would probably be unsuccessful because of just the residual pressure, the outflow from our suit across the surface area of the hatch, that it would probably be a manual opening. Turned out that's exactly what happened, which we trained for. So that was cool. That our umbilicals in microgravity pressurized would actually probably exert, an unexpected, or probably a force that we wouldn't be able to simulate on the ground. And that was spot on. It was pushing us forward into the vestibule, which is interesting. But the performance of the suit run at higher pressures than NASA suits. So we were at 5.2 PSI versus, the low 4s of the EMU suit that NASA uses today, or the high 3s from the Apollo and Gemini days. That higher pressure means it's safer. You have less likelihood of decompression sickness, but it makes it harder from a mobility perspective. Like that heavy clothing becomes super rigid. It's a structure, and the mobility was still very good. People think like when I was holding up my arm that it meant it was hard to move. That's actually, I was doing the test on the other hand. And the cool thing about the suit is wherever you leave your hand, like wherever you stop is where it stays. And you do that on purpose so as not to exert yourself or increase your MET rate. So like that just happened to be where I left my arm. I was doing everything with the other arm. It was working really well.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. All these little things that people don't really realize or appreciate. So that's amazing. Love that insight. And by the way, the spacesuits looked great. I mean, their silhouette, the slim is much different than the MTV days, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. The suits are. I mean, and they have tons of great thermal regulation. Everybody thought we would be really hot just because in the 60s they were, and the limitations of air cooling. I mean, we were freezing, and they're going to move to liquid cooling anyway in the future, but the suits did really well, and they were very slim. Versus like the first test suits we put on was like a full Marshmallow Man deal. Yeah. In good SpaceX form, like they wanted it to be very functional, but they wanted it to look good too.
So we know the Polaris Dawn mission. It reached higher altitudes than any other crewed flight since Apollo. So what were some of the unique challenges of operating at those altitudes, like as you guys were preparing for that versus previous flights, like even Inspiration 4, right?
Yeah, I mean, the higher you go, this all reaches obviously certain points where it changes, but generally the higher you go, you're going to have much more radiation to deal with. When you get into Van Allen radiation belts, like that's that's intense. And versus, you know, a lot of general protection that you get at in lower Earth orbit, you know, where the space station is, you know, you're still getting a lot of the electromagnetic field protection. Second, there's just more debris. So the lower orbits, you just increase, you know, atmospheric drag exponentially, and the debris just naturally burns up pretty quickly. So, you know, those are the two biggest factors that you have to contend with. Actually, let me give you the third, which is if you have to come home in an emergency, that's a problem. So for those that are, you know, following the Artemis program, you know, and the Orion spaceship specifically, there's a lot of questions about, you know, the heat shield holding up in a high heat, high energy deorbit. So, you know, when you're in, you know, when you're in low Earth orbit, you're generally going 17,500 miles an hour approximately. When you're going to the moon or Mars, you're going 25,000 miles an hour plus to escape Earth's gravitational influence. And when you come back on a direct entry, that's a lot of energy to dissipate. And that same holds true the higher your orbit is. So if we had to come back from 1,400 kilometers in an emergency, that's a very high energy deorbit. That's a problem. And problems are good because they need solutions. And those solutions you can apply to future applications, right? Like coming back from the moon or Mars. So, so yeah, you've got higher radiation, you've got higher debris risk. And if you need to come home in a hurry, that's a much different set of problems. That's a very high energy deorbit. And that these are things that, again, SpaceX engineers had to find solutions to. And those solutions can be applied to future problems, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the radiation, and that's kind of a big deal, right? So did you notice anything different in terms of, you know, performance, your health, in terms of the implications of the radiation? And then what's the impact for future space travelers?
It's a great question. So there's two factors for radiation, one of which is the spaceship itself. Electronic components don't like radiation. You can short them out, or what's more what is more likely to happen is, you know, it's called like an upset event, where it needs to be reset in order to work again. So we stood to learn a lot about vehicle design architecture and how to combat the realities of high radiation environments. If we're going to go to the moon and Mars, we're going to be dealing with this all the time. And then second is like human physiology. We obviously want to be able to send people to Mars and have them come back to Earth and tell us about it and not be dead. So we had various science and research experiments around these points specifically. So the reality is, for sure, we definitely took radiation hits during the high apogee passes through the South Atlantic anomaly. You could see the alerts on the screen. They were far less than what we stress test to in training. Like we expected, like, you know, let me not clarify, not expected. We prepared for like Apollo 13 like moments. And we had a lot of comm-related issues. And SpaceX developed a, you know, a fault detection and response capability specifically for this, where the computers would intelligently restart the systems that took those hits faster than we could react. And we watched that happen. It was awesome. It was also believed that, and it's been reported by past astronauts as well, that we would see light flashes. If you close your eyes, you could see, well, I did. And I was kind of at the controls when we went through those high radiation environments. And I closed my eyes because I knew we were taking hits. And it was like a meteor shower in your eyes, which wasn't like even remotely scary in the moment. It was kind of cool to see that something that was predicted would actually play out like that. And but since I came back from Earth, I, for whatever reason, decided to watch Chernobyl again on HBO.
So you've spoken a lot about these scientific research, you know, that's been conducted while you're obviously in space with Polaris Dawn. Which one would you say was, you know, that yielded the most promising results, or things that could help for future flights for space travel?
Yeah, you know, we haven't. It takes a while. Like the principal investigators on all the experiments, and we had about 40. They don't like to give you early data on anything. Like they like to study it and get it reviewed by their peers, and then they publish. So I think it'll be probably several months, at least 6 months, before like we really know the results from a lot of them. it's hard to say. Like, you want to open up space for everyone, so you want to deal with the health challenges that impact the widest group of people. And 50 to 60% of astronauts will get space adaptation syndrome, where they feel horrible for 2 days and need to be treated with medication. And it doesn't matter, like, you could have motion sickness and seasickness on Earth and you feel fine in space, and you could be like the most hardcore fighter pilot on Earth and you feel terrible for those first couple of days. And this is believed to be attributed to the fluid shifts in your body, where there's an increase in the intracranial pressure, which then has all sorts of secondary and tertiary effects from it. And so we had a number of experiments trying to combat that, which would be great for opening up space to many. The second most common is a lot of visual, issues. So which is believed to be as a result of increased intraocular pressure from increased intracranial pressure. This is where people have big vision changes in space, most of which resolves itself when you come back to Earth. So we had tons of experiments. I wore this cyborg lens with pressure transducers in it. We had multiple different ways to take measurements from the eyes, including a special ultrasound that does 3D imaging of the optic nerve. So I think, like, there's no doubt we got tons of data, and I hope a lot of it goes to just making just helping open up space for everyone, really.
I have a follow-up question to that. How did you fare when you returned to Earth? Did you suffer and experience some of these symptoms?
No, I'm in the lucky 50%. So I didn't have any space adaptation syndrome the first mission, which was a pretty good indicator. I went the second, and that was true. I didn't. And then readjusting back to Earth, we were up there 5 days, so it's pretty quick. It's not like, if you're up there 6 to 9 months, like, man, that's a recovery effort. Your arms and legs feel very heavy for the first couple hours, and your world isn't perfectly level as you kind of figure out where the horizon is again. So it's like for 18 hours thereafter, it kind of feels like you're on a boat, but it's not a big deal. We were all kind of back in business pretty quick.
One of the other experiments, I believe, was Starlink's laser-based communications system. Did you test this technology out? How did it perform, and what are the implications for future use?
Oh man, it's such an awesome question. Yeah, Starlink is such a big deal. Now, obviously, it's a huge deal here on Earth. It's world-changing technology. I've said it many times, but I think it's truly foundational to solving so many of the world's problems of just connecting people and access to information. But I'll tell you what, it helps out a lot in space too. So. My first mission to space on Inspiration4, was a new record with 14 people in orbit at one time, and we had like 80% comm coverage, over legacy TDRS and ground stations. And my second mission set a record. There were 19 people in orbit between the Chinese, the space station, and us, and we had like 70% comm coverage. That's not going to work when you have armadas of Starships up there. Like, we need a new means of communication capability. Starlink laser links is the way to do it. I mean, look, there is physics tells us we could be putting, these things in orbits, in varying orbits, and having laser links between here and Mars. Like, you could have several constellations of Starlinks out there and provide connectivity between planets. So think of the implications when you potentially could put these things on deep space probes. Like, we can really free up a lot of the capacity over like the deep space network, not to mention, again, a super fast, reliable form of communication across, fleets of Starships serving different purposes. So it was a very important test for the future of spaceflight, and we wanted to use it to send kind of an awesome message back to the world, which I always think is really important. That we need the support of everyone if we're going to achieve this awesome vision of making humankind a spacefaring civilization. So we picked this kind of flash mob orchestra of people contributing from all over the world, led by our amazing mission specialist, Sarah Gillis, who's a classically trained violinist. And we used Starlink to send that message home, and hopefully it landed. It's important. Like, we need everyone behind us on this.
Yeah, that was just really inspirational, just watching that and seeing that happen all the way from space. What would you say were, potentially the most significant technical or engineering challenges you encountered during the mission, if anything?
Oh man, like everything about Dragon and everything we did is hard. I mean, clearly it hasn't been replicated even by some of the most experienced and well-funded aerospace companies in the world. Nobody else has caught a booster, on a ship yet, an orbital class booster, and SpaceX has been doing that for almost a decade. They brought up so many people back and forth to have a spaceship that can keep you alive and re-enter safely. A spacesuit, nobody's built a new suit in 40 years because it's hard, because you're throwing away all the protection of your spaceship and turning your clothing into a spaceship. That's hard. Going into high radiation environments, even communicating over laser links. Like the briefings we would get from the engineering team working on Starlink over the last couple of years were like mind-boggling. They're like, do you know how hard it is to talk to two objects going 17,500 miles an hour in different orbits over a beam of light, where even a firing of our thrusters could break the connection? Like that's a major engineering challenge, and they figured that out. So I don't know. It's all pretty awesome. Sure, everyone is standing on the shoulders of giants. A lot of things had to be figured out long before our missions, long before SpaceX. But man, they're solving some pretty hard problems, and it's really for the benefit of a more exciting future for everyone.
Speaking of Starship, Jared, I wanted to get your thoughts on the recent launch attempt with the Mechazilla catch system. What were your thoughts there?
It had to have. I mean, my first thought is like it completely reset my timeline, and I think everybody else's as it relates to Starship's impact on the world. So look, I mean, there were a lot of believers already, and I was one of them. But now, am I believing that humans are walking on the moon in 15 years, 10 years, 5 years? It's that number changed. Wow. I mean, I'm sure, I know you guys know, and probably a lot of people watching, but like, it is such a different approach to rocket design than what we've done historically, right? I mean, it takes a lot of energy to accelerate an object to Earth's escape velocity, like 25,000 miles an hour plus. And the way we've done in the past is just continue to shed mass. Now, you naturally shed mass with propellant, but you're also getting rid of the vehicle too. You're getting rid of your first stage, your second stage, your third stage to send a little capsule, to the moon. And SpaceX is like, that doesn't make sense to throw away our spaceship every time. So we want to keep all of it, the whole damn thing, and not shed any of it, just propellant. And as a result, when Starship arrives in orbit, it's got nothing left. It can't go anywhere. The batteries are dead, so to speak. Like it's out of propellant, right? So how do you fix this problem? So like, great, I have a reusable spaceship that can't go anywhere. Well, let's create space-based refueling. Let's send up lots and lots of spaceships to top off a depot, and then we'll send our empty spaceship there to rendezvous with it, top it off, and now literally we opened up the whole solar system. Yeah, you can get to the moon and Mars, but you can get everywhere else too. Right. So it's like, it's such a different approach, and it's so game changing if it works. And what's the first step to proving it works? Catching the damn thing. So that was why it was such an amazing moment, right? Like, it's like, oh man, they're going to catch it. They're going to be able to reuse it, which means they're going to be able to figure out space-based refueling. And if they figure that out, they've opened up the whole damn solar system. It's so awesome to think about.
Yeah. I think you partially answered it, but how do you think, because SpaceX, obviously they're a private company, they're obviously doing a lot of things with NASA, but how do you think that this will speed up? I mean, do you think people at NASA and even Boeing and some of these other companies are feeling like space exploration speeding up again, or is it kind of because it's not, I think Elon has made comments too, he's not doing a lot of these things for like broad awareness, right? He doesn't necessarily care for huge public awareness about this, but how is this going to potentially accelerate, space exploration?
I mean, there's a lot to it. Like, for starters, the fact that they have two factories that will make lots of starships. I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, it's right now a whole debate over Artemis 2, and that it's not a landing mission to the moon, but it's a circumlunar flight. And whether or not, the heat shield's good enough on Orion for them to launch that mission, that's because there's one of them. SpaceX builds lots of everything. So if something's wrong, they fix it or they throw it away and launch the next thing. So like the idea that you could have two factories cranking out Starships is a huge game changer. Like, yes, that is are we closer to like space being really opened up for lots of people? Yes. And the sign of it is the two factories that's mission will be making like literally hundreds of Starships that can hold dozens of people, maybe 100 people. So this is all great. NASA is certainly aware of it. I think NASA helped kind of clear some of the hurdles to get the last, launch, underway with the FAA. And NASA needs Starship to work to land on the moon. I mean, hands down, HLS, the human landing system that NASA is contracted with is a Starship that will land American astronauts on the moon. So NASA needs Starship to work. Now, are they fully aware of like, if HLS works, what does that mean? It means all of Starship works, super heavy Starship. Like it means that, SpaceX can get spaceships to the moon and Mars without Artemis and SLS like that. And they're building lots of them. Like, I don't know if forget NASA, I don't know if the whole world appreciates how much of a change that will be when that day arrives. But for sure, NASA has to be on board with Starship because that's how they're going to land. That's how they're ultimately going to get NASA astronauts to the surface of the moon and back up. And like, I think the rest of the government is waking. I mean, for sure, there's advantages for point-to-point travel, for troops, for cargo, for space probes. You basically have a prefab, mass-producible probe that can go anywhere in the solar system. So I do think everybody is largely aware, and I maybe not to the full potential, but things are changing. And look, the rest of the space industry, there's a lot of startups, from people that, were part of SpaceX alumni that are doing awesome things. Like SpaceX can't solve every one of the problems needed to make life multiplanetary. And there's lots of other companies out there too, kind of following SpaceX principles and trying to contribute to the effort.
Hey, Jared, you've just launched one of many Polaris missions. Can you talk about how the objective of the Polaris program aligns with SpaceX's broader goals?
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, it's like the golden rule there at SpaceX. Like, they don't spend resources or development effort if it doesn't pass the test of will this help get us to Mars. They just don't. Like, they're very smart about opportunity cost and not wasting time or resources on things that don't fulfill that objective. So, Starlink's like, solves a lot of Earth problems, creates a lot of great connectivity here on Earth, generates lots of revenue that can help fund a Mars endeavor, and becomes an alternative communication pathway. Checks a lot of boxes. Spacesuits. If we're going to land a lot of spaceships on Mars, people are going to have to be able to get outside of them. we need suits. So generally these things, going to very high altitudes, well, Starships are going to have to fly through them, and we're going to need to learn what it does to people and what it does to avionics. So anyway, everything kind of has to pass that test. And no doubt, as we fully kind of process all the data from Polaris Dawn, when we think about the next Polaris mission, you're going to build off of these objectives, and it's going to once again have to pass the test of like, based on where we stand today and what we know, how will this help us get to Mars faster? So it's part of the whole mission design process at SpaceX.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it. I think they move quick. They're focused on obviously becoming multiplanetary, getting to Mars, and obviously the mission has to help them get that further to spend the time and resources. But looking ahead, but also to kind of reflecting, now you've been part of two groundbreaking space missions, Inspiration4, Polaris Dawn. How has your perspective changed since the first one, Inspiration4?
I mean, there's just been minor. I mean, I knew this is. I mean, I wanted to be an astronaut and contribute to space exploration since I was a kid. So I knew this is a place I wanted to be at. The last 4+ years of spending time with SpaceX, just a growing appreciation for, again, this is some of the smartest and most highly motivated talent in the world that shows up for work every day, believing that there's no other place they can make as big of a difference in the world. And that's, man, you learn so much in that environment. The first mission, get it right so that a lot of other exciting missions could follow. And Polaris Dawn was a build on that, where the door was open for us to actually start building that exciting future. I think the first mission was incredibly motivating for what's possible, and that we need to get moving very quickly to do it. That it's finally within our means to make real progress in space for everyone. And the second mission, I'd say, was a reminder of how hard it is. That is like space is a very challenging and threatening environment that we did not evolve to be successful in. We will have to work hard and learn new things and develop new things to make it possible, but we have no choice. Like, this is absolutely, our destiny out there. And I think along the way, just reinforcing the importance, especially in a very divided world, that this is good for everyone, that we can, make incredible progress for an exciting world for tomorrow. And we have no idea what we stand to learn, but it will be extraordinary, and it will make life better for all of civilization. And we can also deal with some of the day-to-day, realities, the hardships, the suffering that exists in the world, and try and make it a little better. And I think that resonates with a lot of people, and we're going to need a lot of people behind it, so that we don't have a repeat of, the previous space race where we got there and didn't go back. We need everybody behind why we need to get there, and then keep going.
Speaking of that, what do you think are the next critical steps in advancing commercial spaceflight capabilities?
I think the next big, for sure, SpaceX is going to focus on, being able to rinse and repeat what they just did, because that was, I've said it before, I think that was the most significant engineering accomplishment of the last half century. To catch a skyscraper with chopsticks is freaking hard. So they're going to want to perfect that. But I think the next big milestone thereafter is space-based refilling, because that is the design reality of Starship, is when it gets to space, it doesn't have much left. It needs to be topped off again. To be able to go from orbital velocities to Earth escape velocity is huge. And the way they're going to do it is have to perfect space-based refueling. And that's going to require lots of Starships going up and down. When they check that box, man, yeah, we're on the way.
Yeah, no, it's that's incredible. They're moving at such a fast clip. And I think, it's just really inspiring to see what they're doing. For Polaris, what are you looking forward to most on the next mission?
We just want to move the needle, right? We know that our contributions are pale in comparison to, what the people every day are doing at SpaceX. They're really moving the needle. We just want to be able to kind of contribute in the same regard, something to move the ball forward. And the nice thing is, again, if you don't pass the test of how does this help us get to Mars, there's no mission. So if, when a mission gets announced, that it will have fulfilled those requirements of these objectives do help move the ball forward in the direction of Mars and pass that test. So whatever they are, I'll know they'll be in the direction of goodness, and we'll be thrilled to kind of participate in it.
What's the one lesson you've learned from space exploration, Jared, that you think everyone on Earth can really benefit from?
Okay, it's a broad statement, but it's very hard. It's hard from a engineering perspective. It's hard to accelerate mass to 17,500 miles an hour. It's hard to bring it home. Everything that's up there is meant to make your life more difficult. Radiation, debris. And it's just as hard on the human, and we didn't know that really. Maybe if you read enough of the books of the past from some of the early astronauts, but until commercial space, and government astronauts, you kind of preserve and protect the hero image. You don't get into the gory details that 50-60% of people in space across over 600 will feel horrible. That there is bone density loss, there's vision issues, there's cognitive issues, there's psychological issues, right? Space is very hard, from a technological perspective, engineering perspective, and on the human being. And we just have to rise up to meet the challenge. There can be no turning back. This is too important, for all of humankind to get out there and figure out what we can learn. So, it's why we put so much emphasis on things like, training in mountains and figuring out ways to be comfortable being uncomfortable, to be able to persevere through very difficult circumstances and still get the job done. And that's unchanged. And that will be part of the future of human spaceflight. And then the other part too is just we have to constantly educate people like why it matters. Like we can't wind up in a situation again where we get there and don't go back. We need to get there and keep going. And that will take the support of many. And a lot of people make good arguments about why our attention needs to be entirely here on the day-to-day problems and not invest in the future. And we need to remind them that we can do both and we care about doing both.
Totally. Kelvin, I think you had a follow-up.
Yeah, let me ask this one follow-up question, and then we can wrap. Yeah, you were fortunate. We were fortunate to have you at our X Takeover event, and earlier this year. And part of that was a meet and greet, and I was kind of the gatekeeper in terms of managing the crowds. But I got to hear you interact with a lot of our attendees, and some of them were kids and children, and they were really inspired by you and your mission. So can you talk about advice you have for young entrepreneurs or those who are looking to make an impact in this field?
Well, I think it's just at its basic, by the way, that's one of our obligations. Like we are super lucky to be, we're one of 600 people that have got to see the world from that perspective. And it's like an obligation to bring that experience home, share it with everyone, and try and do as much as you can to get people to look up, from the day-to-day noise and look to the stars and imagine what the future could look like. So I love doing it. It was great to be there and talking to people. And I guess just a message to young folks like out there is like, there is so much opportunity. I mean, every time some new groundbreaking technology happens where we open up a new domain, there are so many other industries that rise up to meet that, that opportunity, right? I mean, you think about, again, like the 1980s, putting up cell phone towers for a handful of rich people with their car phones, like it had to be installed in the car, right? And then you look at it today, and some of the most valuable companies in the world build the software that goes on the phone that talks to those towers, right? When the cost to accelerate mass to orbit is reduced to such an extent that you can have, you can be putting things into space and experiment. You have no idea what the new industry holds, like 3D printing organs in space, space infrastructure, space manufacturing, retrieving asteroids, mining them, bringing things back here on Earth, building bases on or outposts on other planets. Like there is so much to do just in the space world, let alone everything that will change back here on Earth. And SpaceX can't do it all. Like they can build some really awesome technology that'll get us there and bring us back, but there is so much else that needs to be solved along the way. So whether people are dreaming to be astronauts or engineers or scientists, researchers, doctors, like the future is exciting. Like no matter what we are dealing with in the moment, whatever like hardships or things that seem unfortunate or depressing, like it is still no better time to live than today, right? And there's just going to be a lot more opportunity in the future. So I hope there are a lot of like inspired dreamers that want to contribute to the effort.
Yeah, no, I think just your whole mission and some of your quotes when you were up in space were, for me, even personally inspiring to share with my kids as we watched the whole mission kind of unravel. And I think you've said it, very clearly. And then also too, you hear Elon talk about it where, we can't just be so bogged down with, world problems every single day. Otherwise you're going to get depressed. And for me, it's great to just be a fan of the things that you're doing, the fan of the things that, SpaceX is doing, just to, get us a step further and watch all of that unravel and just seeing, what is possible and how can we continue to push the limits. So I personally just want to thank you for, creating inspiration in the midst of a lot of just uncertainty and a lot of problems. I mean, we have elections next week and stuff, and it's great to come back to things like this that are really moving the needle and really helping us get, further versus just focusing so much on the problem sometimes.
Yeah, look, we can do both. We absolutely can, and appreciate what you guys are doing, like bringing events together with a lot of people who are excited about technology, excited about the future is awesome. It's always good to bring, good, inspired, motivated minds together, putting things like this together to educate people, inform people. It's all good. It's awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you again for your time. We've tagged Jared and the Polaris program on X, and then obviously put the links on YouTube, and we're also live on Instagram. So we'll share all of that. But please patronize Jared for his time and give him a follow. And we're looking forward to seeing the next Polaris mission unravel and when that's coming. But it's a really exciting time. I mean, you know, with Starship 5, I'm looking forward to Starship 6 already.
Me too. Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah,
All right.
happy Halloween.